Hey guys, I'm Fainer. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to talk about Pale Wave's new album, Who Am I? So for those of you who are not familiar with Pale Waves, they are a pop group from the UK who burst onto the scene back in 2018 with their debut album, My Mind Makes Noises. Their debut album was one of my favorites from 2018, and I felt it did an amazing job of fusing the 1975 style modern Britpop with 80s goth rock and synth pop sensibilities. And if you're entirely new to Pale Waves, I'd recommend probably starting with that album. But for those of you who listen to My Mind Makes Noises, you'll notice right away that Who Am I has a different tinge to it. And the main sonic difference is that the 80s pop sounds that kind of served as the core of their first album have instead been swapped for 90s pop rock. So where there was once quite a bit of Simple Minds and Cocteau Twins, there's now a bit more Cranberries and Gin Blossoms. They've also changed their promotional outfits and aesthetic from being pretty strictly goth to now being more of a hodgepodge of 90s and grunge. So while Heather is still leaning quite heavily into the goth queen appeal, I'm also getting some pretty serious Belinda Butcher vibes from her outfit in the music video for Change. However, while Pale Waves has changed their sound from having an 80s touch to having a bit more of a 90s touch, it's still heavily based in Britpop, so I wouldn't say this is a fundamental change to their sound so much as a different accent applied on top of the same fundamentals. And I think this is actually a really great decision on their part, which shoots that middle ground between having a dramatic change and alienating a lot of fans, while also not stagnating and releasing the same album twice. So for a moment, I want to go in a bit of a different direction. One of the things I often like to talk about is musical heritage, and I feel like a lot of people would simplify that to be an artist's influences. However, I want to use the term heritage because influences is usually pretty closely tied to like the sounds and bands that an artist is drawing inspiration and sounds from. Whereas by heritage, I more so mean the audience and subculture that the artist intends to target. And while the two concepts are closely related, they are subtly different, and I need to clarify this distinction in order to make my next point, which is that this album manages to further flesh out Pale Wave's musical heritage without notably altering their influences. The prevailing market impression that I got from Pale Waves after My Mind Makes Noises was that Pale Waves was making modern Britpop for people who identified with the traditional goth subculture, which I thought was pretty great because, you know, goths have been a bit of an underserved market in the last decade or so. After mainstream rock music died out in about 2010, the goth subculture seems to have merged pretty heavily with the EDM scene and given rise to the subgenres of like dark wave, cold wave, sex wave, and, you know, some others like that. And while I think that scene is great, and those are very cool genres of music, I think it's also true that this caused a bit of a fork in goth culture, and there hasn't been much of an infusion of fresh blood into the like trad goth scene in recent years. Okay, so with all that said, if Pale Wave's first album was successful for its ability to combine Britpop with the style and sensibilities of goth culture, then Who Am I is successful for expanding and further defining Pale Wave's image beyond that niche appeal. Prior to this album, you could somewhat explain Pale Waves with a one-liner, you know, like it's Britpop with 80s goth added. However, with the addition of this second album, I think it becomes much harder to slap a simple description on this band because they've traced out their heritage and culture much more fully. In particular, I'd say that Pale Wave's sound now has some element of just about everything that was popular but alternative from like the mid-80s to the early 2000s. Like there's pretty much just as much The Cure to their sound as there is Avril Lavigne. Furthermore, they've also placed themselves quite firmly in the realm of LGBTQ positive bands, with both Heather and Doran openly being members of the community and more than a couple songs on this album discussing related topics. So, in this album, Pale Waves has really doubled down on the underlying spirit behind their first album. And in doing so, they've much more clearly shown how they view themselves and what they want their music and brand to be. Their music is an amalgamation of everything that the goth, emo, and artsy kids have always loved, and that's because the band is a group of those sort of people. And all they really want to do is make music that sounds like the stuff they grew up listening to and just keep that musical tradition alive. Alongside that, they seem to have their finger on the pulse of everything that's popular in the alternate mainstream right now, where digging up 80s and 90s influences is the latest trend, pop music is cool again, and LGBTQ plus friendliness is a given. Okay, so closing statement time. The title asks, "Who am I?" And that is exactly what we get on this album. Pale Waves delivers a surprisingly thorough depiction of not only who they are, but also where they come from. And the title isn't some coincidence. They set out to answer this question, and they could not hit you over the head with it any harder. And I know I've sort of framed this review like this album is a marketing ploy, but it's really not. Heather has discussed in interviews how the inspiration for this album was really essentially an existential crisis she had after her tour last year. And I think at the end of the day, this album is a tremendously organic and genuine act of self-discovery by Heather and the rest of the group, which is thinly veiled by some pop music. All right, those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. I'm a new channel, and people liking my videos really helps more people discover my content. Also, let me know what you think of this album, because none of my friends like this stuff, so I'd be more than happy to discuss it with you. And yeah, that's all. And until next time, thanks for watching.